Welcome back, everyone, to the Prospero.Ai stock market live stream. I see people rolling on in here. We have an exciting week in the market. Uh, Maybe can't top last week's events with the Fed meeting last Wednesday, but a few things to discuss. A lot of topics we're going to roll on into today. Today, it'll just be me, Stephen, and George will join me in a few moments. No Matt. So if you have any questions regarding the newsletter specifically, if you're a newsletter reader, feel free to comment them in the chat and we'll get to them. But we won't be doing that big overview of the newsletter in the beginning like we've been doing the past couple Monday streams. Before I get into the topics, I'm going to be bringing up on today's stream. I see we have 10 people in here, so like it up if you love the content and you're a regular viewer. The markets have opened up today. Let's get a live look at the QQQ and SPY net option sentiment, which have been in bullish territories since probably even before the Fed meeting last week, going back to the beginning of last week or even the end of the week before that. I'm trying to open Prospero right now. Not refreshing for me for some reason, so we'll just skip that segment. Maybe we'll come back to it later. But some things we're going to discuss today. So obviously the AI world is something we love to cover. We have two major stories that came out today. Today we have Qualcomm looking to possibly take over Intel, which would be a major shift in the AI chip landscape. It's very early still, but we'll tell you all the details we can. That would be a big shakeup in the semiconductor world. And then another story we'll get to later in the stream is a Jeff Bezos backed company called Perplexity. They're really challenging Google's digital ad dominance. So I'll tell you more details about that. Some of the companies they're already working with are huge companies within the S&P 500. So it seems like Google's getting pressure from kind of all sides because were recently hit from the antitrust stuff going on with them. So it seems like Google has just pressure from everywhere coming. So we'll dive deep into Google stock as well, but also Perplexity. Next, we've had this happen before while we've been streaming, but the US government is quickly approaching a government shutdown. It's about a week away from right now. There was a proposal that came out last night to keep the government funded through December 20th. But if you haven't heard us discuss this before, we'll talk about how government shutdowns get factored into the market, what it would mean if the government did have to be shut down and this proposal isn't received well. But we'll take you through all of the angles of that story. Next, Warren Buffett, as we've covered on the stream, has been selling a lot of his positions. Specifically, Apple and Bank of America are two that he's really sold a lot in. But there's one company that not only has he not been selling, he's been buying, and he's negative on. So is that an opportunity for investors of this stream and of the stock market to get in a Buffett stock at a lower cost basis than him? We'll take you through that. I'm wondering if I see we have 30 people in this stream right now. I'm wondering if any of you know the stock we're going to be talking about that is mentioned in that story. Next, this is kind of on the funnier side. It's discussing the back and forth that we've seen for years now between Elon Musk and the SEC. They're now asking a federal judge to sanction Elon Musk and also hold him in civil contempt because he's missed two depositions regarding the 2022 Twitter acquisition. It's interesting the back and forth they have. Seemingly, it's getting a little emotional between both sides now. Probably, maybe Elon Musk is the only person that could actually take on a federal agency and win. But we'll discuss all of that. And then we have two more stories. First of which is the fact that many luxury stocks such as LVMH, Ulta Beauty, Hugo Boss, Burberry, Gucci, etc., have been struggling and underperforming in the recent market. Probably not a great sign for how investors are feeling about the upper end consumer, which I think will be an interesting thing for us to discuss since we usually, I feel like, highlight lower end and middle class consumers. But what is this underperformance in this in this luxury area of the market. What do we need to know about that as investors of the market? And last but not least, before we head over into the model portfolio update at the end of the stream today, we'll discuss crypto post Fed rate cut. What does it mean for Bitcoin, the crypto world? And hello, George. Welcome to the stream and all of the like. We know that crypto trades as a risk asset. So I'm wondering if a rising tide in that area of the market, small caps, risk assets will also help crypto. Let me see if I could pull up right now the QQQ net option sentiment for the stream.
Working on something to
It's been
fix that.
hovering around mid 50s for the better part of the last week. I don't see it right now though, so we'll just go back.
Yeah, there's something going on with our ETFs. We're working on fixing it.
George, you have no audio right now. The picture is crystal clear though, but there's no audio.
No audio. Let's see.
I hear like a faint bubble noise, but there's no like no speech.
A fake bubble noise. Are you sure? Like, my voice is a little.
No, I just hear like crackling like oh, the chat says they hear you, but I don't hear you. I hear both. I hear him.
I hear both. The crackling noise. Let's see.
Interesting. I can't hear you.
It could be
Do you
your
think
audio.
maybe I should leave and come back?
Maybe, yeah. If they can hear me. My voice is a little like I'm getting over something.
I can't hear anything. Okay.
So
I'm gonna leave. I'm
that
gonna
is a
leave
real
and I'm gonna
thing.
come back in.
But I think the audio should be fine. It's the right input, everything. We'll see what's going on. Getting it all set up. I know it's been a slow morning for me, everyone. It's been trying to get that thing fixed. I got a little sick over the weekend, so you'll have to bear with us.
Testing.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. That was
Oh,
weird.
there we go.
Like I was stuck underwater. I was hearing like, yeah, that was odd.
There you go. With all the problems on my computer, I was like, no, I thought I finally had it like fully debugged. So you were
Well,
scaring me there.
yeah, well, thank you to the chat for signaling that to me because I would have been so confused for a while there. But uh, without further ado, we could get started on stuff we want to talk about today. I think one interesting, more macro discussion we can have leading today's stream is we've been talking and highlighting the high level of volatility that we've been expecting in the market now through the election. It seemed like there was a lot of risks for the market over the end of this year, but we've seen maybe surprising strength. I think we're either at or near all-time highs in almost all the indices. So what can we point to that has given the market the strength it's had, especially in this? It wasn't only the election, but also the September, October like seasonal weakness. So how has the market been able to overcome all of the challenges that were ahead of it?
I mean, I think we're definitely seeing, we talked about like the earnings, and there should have been a lot more strength in the earnings, right? We talked about the extent that like it was close to, I think, an 80% um, earnings beat for companies, and I think it was like 75% in tech. So we were saying that there was macro factors basically holding back the market. And I think there's less of those macro factors holding back the market. Obviously, optimism on interest rates are going to be a big thing. But I think that's why we're seeing ongoing volatility too, because I think we said it last week in our newsletter that there's a great story for bulls, and there's also kind of a great story for bears right now. So I think we're going to continue to see that be a tug of war.
Okay, so this story I think has to be our leadoff for today because it's such a shift in major companies. I mean, Intel is a long-standing giant and kind of like one of those American pillars of America within the semiconductor industry. But we've been covering how they've been struggling recently. The stock has just been one of those ones that you wish you didn't own for a while now. They were approached by Qualcomm in a very early talks for a takeover, not a hostile one, a friendly one. They mentioned in the article, but there's not a lot of details around it since it's such an early stage right now. I'm wondering if they leaked this to see how it would be the reaction that they would get from the market and investors. Maybe you could share insights on that. But what was mentioned is that Apollo Global would commit $5 billion of an investment in this deal to make it happen if it ever comes true. But so, how do you feel about Qualcomm, Intel, and then also the fact that this news came out so early before there's a lot of crisp details around it?
Yeah, I'm trying to see what happened the day the announcement was made. Um, because sometimes, they can say friendly takeover, but sometimes it's like the game's on, right? And they basically say that that it's going to be a friendly takeover. They want, they're basically very nicely saying that they see weakness in Intel and they see a potential, to gather strength behind a takeover. So you always have to watch. I don't think anything, when it comes to corporate actions and you potentially like taking over a company, I don't think anything is ever that friendly. Um, but I think we've called out Intel specifically for being terribly managed, right? Intel was actually started by one of my favorite entrepreneurs, Bob Noyce. Um, and they were started with a very like kind of like an efficient egalitarian mindset. So, and for a while, they were the leader. I mean, frankly, like we talked about in our letter, and we talked about like concentration of power and funds and being able to accelerate better products out of that, right? There's no reason Nvidia should exist with Intel doing their jobs. They were the dominant chip maker. I mean, they had Microsoft, pretty much in every Microsoft computer, and Microsoft was dominant. So yeah, there's really no reason NVIDIA should have ever been able to take the market share that they did, other than, you know, Intel kind of failing and kind of failing out on especially R&D, right? Because NVIDIA obviously really popularized these GPUs, and Intel was obviously more of a CPU company, and it's not, transferable. But again, it's something that their R&D could have covered. But like, it's a bad company when they even have the inside track on these government funds and they get a boost from that, and they can't even make the stock price work when they're like literally getting government handouts. So yeah, I think the market is being very clear that they don't trust the management of Intel. And when the market is being clear that they don't trust the management of Intel, then you start to have other companies saying like, hey, maybe we can capitalize on this. I do think it is kind of funny because Qualcomm isn't exactly the best managed company in terms of like a lot of the other, they haven't really rode this like chip craze as much as like, even looking at Broadcom, like Broadcom and Qualcomm for many years were viewed very similarly, maybe even Qualcomm as the better company. And Broadcom has just done way better um, with the AI rally, right? So I think that's the kind of thing that you always have to look at what the market thinks of a company. And the market's being pretty clear that it doesn't think very much of Intel. And like sometimes you do have to depend on the market a little bit because, as people know, my background is as an equity analyst. I did used to have a lot of like direct communication with companies, and you get a feel for how you thought of the management. But, in my position right now, I don't really have a lot of direct contact with companies. And in terms of, things like what does the market think of the management? Like on this one, you don't have to look very hard, right? You don't have to look very hard on like, to understand just how the company's treated, what the market thinks of like Jensen Huang. There's a lot of like, obvious what does the market think of management in terms of the relation of kind of like, I would say, how much a company earns to the way it's priced, right? And like pretty much inherently, anytime you're talking about a company that's trading in a high EPS range, there's either very exciting products on the horizon, management is trusted, or much more likely both.
Now, I am a little curious about what Qualcomm even sees in Intel because they have a very high level of debt that I would think would be concerning for an acquirer of a company like that. Could it just be the relationships that Intel has and the legacy, infrastructure that they've built? Um, why would Qualcomm even be interested in Intel?
Oh, I mean, I think there's a huge opportunity with the chips bill, right? And Intel having an inside track, right? Because it's not just the funds now. When something like a chips bill is passed, right? That's the government saying that like we are interested in putting funds into being price competitive on chips, and especially like the kind of input chips that Taiwan Semi is dominant in right now. The government's basically saying like we are interested in making sure that like even artificially our companies can compete. Um, so I think that that's very enticing. It's kind of like an open channel um, to the government in terms of like that's just the beginning, and the government's already made an investment in those chips being competitive, right? So it's basically saying that it's willing to make a bigger investment too, and I think that that's probably the very interesting thing. The government just doesn't make one small investment. If it's interested in this, it's probably interested in this for a longer time. And it's bipartisan, right? So I think that that's a big thing that any acquirer is going to look at. I don't think anyone would think very highly of um, Intel's business today, to your point. But what it could be in partnership with the government is pretty big. And when you start to look at that, right, it's not just that they're going to be making chips, right? All of a sudden, maybe the government's interested in making sure that NVIDIA starts buying some of these chips, right? Maybe it subsidizes a deal to make sure that Intel is the supplier of these, or Intel Qualcomm is a supplier of chips to NVIDIA. There's lots of different ways, and right, you look at what Trump's been saying too, right? You look at this deal, and if Trump wins, he seems pretty committed, right, to making Chinese goods and Taiwan very associated with it less dominant, right? So you could certainly stand to reason that even the Biden administration was friendly to this deal, that the deal could get even more interesting, profitable, attractive if Trump wins.
So, speaking of the government, we have a topic around them today because we are fastly approaching a possible government shutdown. It's only about a week away if a deal isn't signed. There was one proposed last night that would keep the government funded through December 20th. I think they're going to discuss this week if they're going to accept it or not. But we've actually had this happen while we've been streaming, and we've talked about it then. But maybe there's some new viewers of our stream. So, how does a government shutdown weigh on the market, and then what are the outcomes if it gets passed, or if the government does have to shut down for a period of time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things that um, we have a pretty cowardly government, right? In terms of like, and that shows up in like not a lot of laws being passed in general. But that also shows up in uh, not wanting like something like a shutdown to happen. So until we kind of see different behavior, um, then I really don't think we can expect. Um, I really don't think that we can expect them to have a shutdown. I think it might get close. I think it might affect the market, but I think they'll always make a deal. Hold on, I'll be right back.
No problem. I'm gonna take the stream through how the markets are performing because I don't think I ever got to that at the beginning of the stream. We are back to the more normal setup where IWM Russell is down on the day, 0.6%, but the SPY and the QQQ are both up about the same, 0.15%. So we're in a more normal market
Yeah,
setup.
that's pretty interesting too, because it was like pre-market last night, it was up like 0.9%, the Russell. So that just goes to show like what we keep saying with small caps and like what it's even about. Like even if they get a little rally going, they can't maintain any kind of rally, and they're just not being, the large cap growths are doing well again.
It's
And
those
you'd
value
expect small cap
algorithms.
to do well, you know?
Mhm.
with this big rate cut, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah, very interesting times we're living in. I feel like there's, uh, pressure coming from like, is the economy weakening? And that would be bad for these small cap companies that are unprofitable versus the rate cuts, which are just like maybe short term, like a pump, but they're not really long lasting. So I don't know. Maybe those two things are kind of battling right now for the small caps.
Definitely.
Um, did we get to? I don't know if you were finished talking about the U.S. government shutdown topic.
No, yeah. I mean, I think that that's all there is really to say on it. That it's just
Yeah.
like I think they might take it close, but I don't think either side has the guts to actually like go through a shutdown. Like the apathy, the disappointment. Like if there's one thing, like the overall approval rating of government has just been horrible. Like nobody's got like as it is, people are pretty pissed off. But I think both political parties are too afraid of, you know, being viewed as any more incompetent than they are.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. We'll stream on Wednesday for 3 p.m. for our viewers. Tune back in then. I'm sure we might have an update on this story.
They might take it to the end, right? They do that all the time, but or they might have an extension and then do it. We've seen their playbook basically.
Well, that's an interesting point. Like, even if they get this deal through, it's through December 20th. That's like 3 months from now. Like, why is it so short? Can't they fund the government for like a year or something? Uh, I don't know
I think
why.
they
Like,
continue to be too optimistic that they can find a long-term solution and then they just never can, right? So it's
mhm.
funny, but it's how they do it.
Yeah. Uh, anyway, someone who had more money than the U.S. Federal Reserve recently is the next person we're going to talk about, Warren Buffett. So we've been covering and highlighting how he's been selling, Apple and Bank of America are two he's really been selling recently. Seems like he's piling into cash, but one stock that he hasn't been selling and he's also down on overall is Occidental Petroleum. So investors have an opportunity to buy Oxy right now below Warren Buffett's cost basis. Should they look at that as an opportunity or just something to stay away from for now?
Oh, I think definitely. Like anytime you get the opportunity to buy something cheaper than Buffett, like, you know, all he does is win. I mean, he does have some losses. But I mean, there's obviously the Buffett factor of like, we've talked about it. Like not only is he very smart with his investments in terms of value, he helps the companies. He advises them, he helps them do well, he uses his connections. So there's that. And then you also have the fact that energy's been pretty beat up and people think it might be near the bottom. So there's kind of like that macro force that says like you might be getting a deal on energy. And Warren Buffett says, you know, not only might you be getting a deal on energy, but you might be getting a deal on like the valuation of Occidental as well. So, you know, that's not really the kind of investment we make at Prospero. Just because I look at it, it's even for an energy stock, it's not really good enough in the signals. But that could be something that we looked at, say, in the trading portfolio versus uh, the investing. And you know what? We'll probably just put some in because why not? But it's one of those things that becomes challenging because then we have to like apply a different set of rules to it than we do a normal stock. But if your portfolio is if you don't have energy exposure and you have a pretty large portfolio, there's no reason not to allocate to it as far as I see it.
I was just kind of laughing when you said it's not the investment we usually make because I was wondering like what kind of state would the world have to be in if Oxy was like a 90 net option sentiment, like 90 upside in Prospero? Like, I think there might be some turmoil going on throughout the world if that was the case.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually seen it go pretty high. I don't know to 90, but there was one day when he announced a much bigger stake where net option sentiment was pretty high.
Hmm. Yeah, so interesting. So you're not necessarily opposed to Oxy. It's just it would maybe be a shorter term thing for you because it sounded like it'd be a trading letter ad, just kind of as if it's bottoming, maybe coming back to the market a bit. But we'll keep our eyes on
Yeah, so
Oxy.
so just as a quick comparison, Fang is normally what I look at. Um, yeah, Mario. FANG is what I normally look at when I say, hey, is it time to add energy? And FANG's an 84 profitability, 81 growth, 60 upside, 34 downside, 57 net option sentiment, right? And Oxy's lower profitability and growth and also lower upside. So it's not as attractive. Like Oxy's 56 profitability, 43 growth. It does have a little higher net option sentiment, maybe because of the announcement. But as a comparison point, FANG just looks stronger.
When you say like FANG is usually the stock you'll go to if in the energy sector, is that based off the Prospero signals and like it's always yeah?
It typically, like when I do the diversified portfolio and I take the top in each one, FANG is almost always the top. There's one other that I take sometimes, and I'm not thinking of the name.
Why do you
But
think that's the case? Is it the management of FANG is good and that's why it's always high in the signals, or how does it separate itself, you think, from the other companies?
well, I think I said it, like 84 profitability, 81 growth. That's really good. Like that's a very like I think only because this is an energy stock is it lower with that kind of profile. That's a very good profitability and growth. Like I think that's better than Nvidia profitability plus growth, for example.
Yeah. So
Oh,
moving
Nvidia is
on.
lower on the profitability. Yeah.
That's something I would never have guessed. Nvidia is lower than FANG in profitability. Oh, I guess
No, I
I
mean,
guess
I'm
it's
saying it's
possible.
lower even compared to itself. It's already down all the way down to 57. I think it's like I think it just kind of grew too fast.
Is that breaking news? Is that concerning or no?
I mean, I don't have it in my portfolios, but yeah, it doesn't look that good right
Hmm.
now. It's got good net social.
Maybe I should jump a story. We'll come back to the one I was going to go to and talk about this AI one since we're on the topic of Nvidia. Not really necessarily involving Nvidia, but a Jeff Bezos backed AI company called Perplexity is going after Google's dominance in the digital ad industry. They're coming up with a new way of uh, handling the digital ad space because Google has an auction-based ads model. Um, they're already in talks with mega companies like Nike and Marriott, and obviously, since Jeff Bezos has invested, he's probably helping them, like how you mentioned Warren Buffett always. But I feel like this maybe I'm overreacting, but could it be concerning for Google? You know, how they're facing this antitrust pressure, which is essentially saying they're too dominant, but now they're also facing all this pressure from these AI startup companies, which is like challenging their dominance. So it's like pressure on both sides. So, how do you see this shaking out for Google?
Um, I think Google's looking pretty bad right now, to be honest. Like I'm hearing more and more people talk about Perplexity, right? There's a decent buzz to it as a search engine, especially in like the very techie community. Um, so I think there's that. And then I also think, there's OpenAI, right? OpenAI is like not, I think you've heard me say like more in the past, like, I still think Google's a big bet because of their brain, but they're not really competing as I thought they would. Like I'm not counting them out, but they've had plenty of time to kind of like use that brain and productize. And, you know, I don't think they're responding very well. Um, so yeah, I'm color me concerned about Google. I don't really like I was considering adding it because it had like I think 9 green days in a row, and I think it got beat up pretty far. But like its macro concerns um are are definitely there. And I just think like Google kind of had this brand where you're just like, oh, use it for maps, use it for mail, use it for everything. Like, and if you were going to use it as search, it was easy for you to get mail there, right? But I could definitely see Google, if it's not the dominant search engine, starting to lose, some of the other things like mail. I mean, maps already, I kind of use Waze too, but Google Maps is just like such a standard that would be a pretty hard product to attack, I think, and they've got such an entrenched kind of um, AI mapping, Google Earth. They really spent well in that area, I'd say. But yeah, I definitely think there's search engine threats. You have like Apple like really going aggressively for that like kind of like phone native AI search with OpenAI, that I think that could definitely, threaten Google's mobile search. And then, I mean, the elephant in the room of, this new ad model is that like I've definitely noticed more and more that Google's search engine and results are like littered with ads. Sometimes I feel like you're scrolling for like on your phone, like a few full scrolls or like a full few rotations before you even get to the organic search, right? And that's what people kind of always say is the danger of having a public company in terms of the product quality, right? Because um, eventually you're just competing against yourself, right? And you need more ad revenue and you have like the same amount of space. So what do? You're cramming more and more ads. That's how you ultimately increase your revenue as your Google. But you're kind of taking a direct opposition to your users. And I think, for a while, when it was more just like you had the ads and then you also had the top organic search all in one place, I don't think it bothered me as much because I also viewed the ads to be relevant, right? But now that it's like such a long scroll to get to organic search, like I've started to use Perplexity a little bit. And it's weird because it's a little different and it's not necessarily in my flow. Um, but but yeah, it's one of those things that we talk about NVIDIA and their market share. But if they start to lose their stranglehold, like right now, part of the Google stranglehold is when you have a website, everything is organized around getting good Google search results. But if Google's not the only game in town, all of a sudden, the whole way you organize your ads is going to be less oriented around Google. And like, yeah, I would say this perplexity thing uh, is the first like chink in the armor. And I think part of the reason people are more open to it is people are more open to new AI technologies. And I do think this Apple uh, OpenAI partnership is even more troublesome. I even heard, I think it's Verizon and AT&T. I have to look into this like more because I might be trading in my phone soon. I think you can trade in any phone to get the newest, like 16 with kind of like their smart search, um, which basically means like Apple sees the value in, gathering these search results. And it has always made sense. Like Siri was always crap, right? And I actually, in my Google Home, I'm like, I ask Google questions and things like that. But like, if Siri and this like OpenAI embedded thing was like better, I would much rather just ask my phone for an answer uh, than to search anything, especially if it's going to be a less ad embedded experience.
Now, I just have one follow-up on the Google ecosystem. So they have so many different, segments of their business, and you were highlighting some of them. And there's been kind of these theories going around that Google was going to be split up like externally, but if their search engine business is kind of getting so much pressure, but then, for example, the YouTube side of their business maybe isn't being hurt by AI or it's being helped by AI, so that YouTube is outperforming, but the search engine is underperforming. Do you think Google could internally split off their business? And uh, is that a possible outcome you see in the foreseeable future, maybe sooner than people expect? The reason I ask this is because Intel, which is another stock that it's been underperforming, they spun off Mobile.Ai, which was something that was maybe getting covered up within their business. So they decided to spin it off. Could Google do the same thing with like YouTube, for example?
Um, I don't think they would. I mean, they would really have to be struggling. Um, I don't think like, and I think you have to realize that these companies are so big that it would have to be like a pretty prolonged struggle before they would do that. And I think that even if there's threats, it would take a long time for Google to like not still have like a strong hold on that. And if you look at something like YouTube is, could potentially become the main way that people consume media. Like they're doing really interesting things with just like straight up like TV and the sports things and honestly like YouTube is becoming more and more just like where I watch content instead of even opening up Netflix or Max, which are like kind of my other two um go-tos. Like, and especially as I watch more stuff. And the thing about YouTube is like I'm watching more like documentaries on YouTube. So it's actually like more educational and they've done really good things with content there. So, it is one of those things that I think is smart with their business in terms of search, right? Because if they do have this like one-stop shop for video, I do think video is going to become more and more important. And again, if something happens to TikTok in America, like YouTube could really be well poised at this point to capitalize on it. So we don't need to call Google's funeral or them splitting up their businesses or whatever. I do think, to your point on the monopoly, like it could be something that they would maybe entertain because of the monopoly thing. However, like the monopoly argument really weakens if they lose any market share on search, and it does look like one way or the other that's coming.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll keep our eyes peeled on Google. This next story is a little bit more lighthearted that we're going to get into. On my phone on the topic section, it's called SEC hates Elon. So a federal judge is asking for, or no, the SEC is asking a federal judge to sanction Elon Musk because he has skipped two deposition appearances relating to his 2022 Twitter acquisition. And they're also asking the federal judge to hold Elon Musk in civil contempt. So, George, I think I want you to choose your fighter. Elon Musk may be the only single person that could stand up to the SEC, and it's an equal battle. But uh, they've had this long, ongoing feud. It seems like that it's starting to get like personal, or I don't know. So, who do you think is gonna end up on top of this dispute, the SEC or Elon, in the end, long term?
I think it depends. Might depend who's in office. Like, I think I don't see the SEC getting what they want from him if Trump is in office, and it's probably even a sense of like, you know, Biden and Harris, like whatever. Like at this point, until they know the outcome, there's no point in like pushing any sanctions or whatever on him. Um, I do know. I mean, the SEC doesn't go after a lot of people. Let's be honest, but they do have a pretty good record of when they do go after people, actually like getting settlements or getting their person. Now, what's very interesting about the Musk thing here is like with things like Starlink, like we saw basically him exerting his force like against the US government and kind of getting his way on things because Ukraine was dependent on Starlink satellites. And we've talked about that story. So I do think it's kind of this overall trend, right? And this is kind of the link between the last two stories. We are seeing like an overall trend of, the most powerful individuals in America, like getting closer and closer in power to the US government. Like, I don't think this is something we would have seen, 20 years ago, certainly. And we actually talked about, um, historical like Gilded Age things in our newsletter this weekend. And like it's kind of starting to look very similar than that, where like some of these like individuals are, more powerful than the government, you could say. And you could certainly say that might be what we're looking at here when you just have someone, passing on making a court appearance. And like I'd say it's even interesting that it hasn't happened already, right? Like it's a back and forth. Like normally, like if people don't appear in court, like you got to settle, you got to make things. I don't, I can't really think of another instance of someone just not showing up, right? And it is like a real charge that they're bringing against him. And if you think of the thing with um, the pay package and it getting denied and everything. There's a lot of back and forth between them. Um, but I do ultimately think it is like, I think he might actually have to answer. I think he's too integral to the economy, um, that he would ever like see any severe consequences. But I'm gonna go out on a limb and say he's gonna get fined if Democrats win. And if Trump wins, he's going to get a lot more powerful. And I think it's going to go like one way or the other. I've said it. Like, I think if Trump wins, we're going to see some kind of broad rollout of full self-driving in America. And I don't think, any punishments around that. And I think there's been talk of him being on like an economic council where he makes the government more efficient. And actually, like, I wouldn't, as much as I think Elon Musk, uh, it scares me kind of how selfish of a person I've seen him become. There's another side to it where I'm just like, Jesus, anyone with like an actual business mind that knows how to run a Fortune 500 company, like, and increase its value is going to do way better. Like, actually doing things like cutting the fat um, in government. So I think that might be one of the better things that could happen um, if Trump
So
gets
I
elected.
I saw him tweet about that, and it could lead us into our next topic. Well, it's called the Department of Government Efficiency, or Doge, which we all know is history with Dogecoin. And it's something I wanted to talk about today, the crypto space, because I feel like we haven't talked about it in a bit now. Uh, After the rate cut, which seemingly benefits, riskier assets, small cap assets, maybe unprofitable companies, Bitcoin kind of and crypto kind of tends to trade in that realm of the market. Do you expect the rate cutting environment to help crypto going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think rates being cut are huge for crypto, and just like the environment around, like, that we know there's going to be more coming, and that it's going to be like a rate cutting economy. I think, unlike small caps that we've seen a lot of volatility in, I think, you know, crypto is definitely well positioned um, to do well. Um, Honestly, I think uh, in either um, administration that could win. I just think if there's one thing, like, I don't think the Democrats will be as friendly to it, but I think people are seeing the power of kind of like the crypto audience. And I think it's like a real voting block now that I think either party are going to kind of like start respecting um, a lot more. So, I mean, I think, yeah, I think, you know, I always say, like, on a longer time scale, I'm bullish on crypto, but to me, there's almost always better, more sure opportunities um, in the short term. Um, but I could definitely see me say, like, having Coinbase as a long-term uh, position after the election stuff is sorted out, and all, and this volatility is sorted out around that, because I do think that's something that, regardless of what economy we're in, I think that is a good long-term growth, especially something like Coinbase.
It is very interesting to me how, like, every story we talk about now, like, the election kind of makes its way into it somehow, and it's so important and it's so uncertain. Like, it's like a coin toss right now. So uh, I think that just goes back to the volatility you're expecting to see. Like, we've talked about the uncertainty, how it affects the market, and it's funny to me. Like, every story kind of comes back to it. Like, and they have I mean, obviously they have different opinions on, everything almost. So maybe crypto. You actually did mention that they both might support crypto. So maybe that's one thing that people can be sure of in this uncertain time. But yeah, it is an interesting observation to me that, like, just
But there
the
could be a lot
election.
of volatility heading into it. So now, I'm not necessarily saying buy now.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. We do have one more story to discuss today. So happy to see we've had over 1,000 people in the stream. Thank you all for tuning in. Please like it up if you like the content we talked about today. Feel free to leave a comment for us or questions about anything that we didn't discuss that you want to hear. But I'll start rolling into our next topic, which I feel like we more often than not talk about lower end and middle class consumers on the stream. Maybe they make up a much more large portion of the economy. But this topic today is around luxury stocks underperforming the market recently. A lot are not performing well. Some, for example, LVMH, Ulta Beauty, Hugo Boss, Burberry, Gucci. There's many more as well. So, seemingly, if these luxury upper end fashion retailers are struggling, that would be a worrying sign for the market's perspective about the high end consumer upper end of the economy. Um, what does that mean, really? Like, what could they be seeing, or why are these stocks underperforming? Just what do investors need to know about that kind of dynamic that's happening?
Well, I think we're definitely in a time where um, where we need to kind of see what kind of economy we're in terms of like I think it's very easy to say that that other consumer goods on the lower ends in a lot of different economic scenarios are in danger, right? And we've seen them get hit, and a lot of our shorts this year has been over that. But I think if you start to look at like the relative value of some of these companies, I think that we are starting to see declines in luxury sales, right? I think that wasn't happening, and now I'm seeing like especially a lot of consumer defensive stocks, um, kind of underwhelming on earnings, concern for them, and I think that that's like um, I think we've talked about before, like some economic concerns. I think the alternative, like macroeconomic things. I think we talked about like lipstick being up, typically meaning like things like vacations are going to be down because that's like a smaller luxury, and then things like stripper tips being down was another one that like also was kind of like a proxy for like luxury, like concerns around luxury goods. We're starting to see real estate prices fall. I was like seeing like uh, a market like Miami, right? That's just obviously a very strong market, and like has been a strong market since the pandemic, since a lot of like I'd say even New Yorkers kind of moved down there. So I think we're starting to definitely see uh, kind of chinks in the armor of spending, and we've kind of talked about the difference between like perhaps goods being less sales and jobs around that, but still like the economy as a whole, especially around like big tech, could grow. And I think that's why, we continue to maintain bullishness on big tech. And like that's, pretty much what we're in. This week, we've been shrinking our portfolio, and I would say really prioritizing like the best names there. Um, but yeah, I think that, we are definitely starting to see both, sales declines as well as like more concern that, you know, the jobs market could show problems that could have results on spending, even if that's not necessarily going to affect companies that are like growing in AI. I think we're starting to see that firm up, and that's what been our thesis. So we've said many times that um, 2025 could be the first ever bull market we've seen with um, worsening labor conditions and kind of like recession based labor conditions, even without like like what you'd see in terms of negative GDP. You might just see it affect jobs and not necessarily GDP because the tech companies would still be growing. Um, and I think there's a story that we might see that. So yeah, I'm not surprised that people are getting defensive on luxury brands because like it's one thing to say things like, oh, like cloud spending could grow. And even, uh things like we're talking about like chip demand stay strong and everything, on those things. But labor and luxury goods could be down. And there's certainly a story that could be the case, even if the market overall is strong.
Well, that will certainly be a confusing time in 2025 if that prediction comes true. So, no better time to download Prospero, follow the signals, watch the streams. We'll be streaming throughout the whole process. So, we'll keep you up to date on everything you need to know. But that was the final topic. So, George, we'll do our switch over and we'll share the model portfolio with everybody on the other side. and I'll hang out with the chat and I'll update you guys on what we're seeing in the market. Okay, I was wondering if George is about to leave. Thank you for everybody that's commented. Mario, David, Jill, Jonathan, good to see people in the comments enjoying the stream. Hope it was topics that you enjoyed so far today. Let me see if Prospero is back up and cooking. I don't know what's going on today. I'm not getting the Prospero signals on my phone right now, so I don't know if I can share with you guys the QQQ and the SPY net options sentiment on the day. We are left in the dark for now. Maybe George will have them on his computer when he comes back in the Prospero lab. But the markets are doing well. QQQ is up 1/4%. SPY is up 1/3%. The IWM is currently the only index that is down there. It is down 1/4%. So it is the laggard on the day. Let's take a look at some sector specific data. Actually, maybe I should start updating. If comment right now, do you guys want me to start when I go through how the indexes are performing on the day? Do you want me to mention crypto, Bitcoin? Do you want to hear any other things shared when I go through that on the streams? See, we have a question from Jonathan. Historically, in an election year, we usually see the drop in the S&P 500 around September and October before the elections, and then we see rally post-elections. Do you think this year might be different of AI? All right, George. So we did get a question. I'll read it quickly for you. It's from Jonathan. He's saying historically the S&P 500 drops September, October in election years and then rallies after. Do you think this year might be different because of AI, or will history repeat itself?
I don't think it's going to rally after. I mean, I think it's going to rally after if Trump wins. I do not think it's going to rally after if Kamala wins. Just because I also think that there's no way that the election is not going to be disputed if Kamala wins, and I actually kind of see a very low chance of the election actually being decided on election night, just generally. So I do kind of think whenever, by the time someone takes office, I do think we'll see a rally then. And I think if Trump wins in kind of like a shorter, like less disputed election, I think that we will see an immediate rally. But it's going to be more prolonged if not. All right. Any other questions? I've decided with the app not really functioning in terms of QQQ and SPY net option sentiment that I'm not going to do the update. But any other questions? We'll pause for one more.
Yeah, let's get, we'll see if anybody types it up. Jonathan said, appreciate it for your response. Yeah, that was a pretty good response to that question. Very thorough.
All right. Then I think I'll rest my voice.
Yeah, it sounds like you're
another X. I have another X live later, so that'll be fun.
Tea and honey.
Yeah. All right.
All right, George. Thanks for joining today. Thank you, chat. We'll be back Wednesday. See you guys then.